You see that explosion last night in the LAPD bomb squad vehicle? All those fireworks, 5,000 pounds of illegal fireworks that were seized from a home in South Los Angeles. They loaded the fireworks into the vehicle, and in the detonation process that was supposed to be safe, a number of people were injured, some hospitalized. Destruction ranged from vehicles to damage to homes. And of course, the city of Los Angeles and federal authorities are trying to figure out what happened. The LAPD and ATF investigators are combining their efforts. 17 people were injured. 10 law enforcement officers were included in those injured. So, of course, we'll have the very latest on that investigation throughout the course of the day on All Things Considered with Austin Cross at 1 o'clock, and then Nick Roman back, of course, for the afternoon drive time edition of All Things Considered here on KPCC. The majority of women who find themselves without a place to live got in that position as a result of domestic violence. 57% report that was why they ended up living on the streets, in their cars, or other non-permanent housing. In LA, almost 40% of women who are homeless say that they have experienced abuse within the past 12 months. Our Julia Paskin has been closely reporting on this and producing a series for LAist.com, as well as talking about it right here on KPCC. The series is Pushed Out. Julia, thank you so much for being with us. Just share with us generally some of the conversations you had with women who are in this position.
Hi, Larry. Yeah, well, I'd say, the most consistent observation from all the survivors that I interviewed would be that, no matter what the situation, everybody experienced the same set of conditions that made it pretty much impossible to find permanent housing when leaving their abuser. There's common things like isolation from your family and your friends, having your ability to access your own bank account being limited, all kinds of methods of fear and intimidation. And it didn't really matter the person's background. They were able to be vulnerable to that and then unable to find housing when needed.
And were in some of these cases the women fearful of contacting their family that they might have been estranged from for fear that they might bring the violence to family members?
That has been an issue, and a number of people reported that when they tried to flee, they were only able to stay for a few hours at a relative's home because they knew that's exactly where their harm doer or abuser would come to find them. Then there's also the issue of just feeling ashamed. You start to talk about these things with friends and family, and sometimes you can experience judgment. People will tell you, "Why do you stay? You're dumb to stay," that kind of thing, which is very hard to then come back to that friend or relative and say, "Hey, I need your help now."
Well, I'd like to hear from listeners who have found themselves in this position. If you at any point in your life, and doesn't have to be a woman, could be a man as well, found yourself in a position where you had to leave because of abuse in your home and you had no place to go. How did you deal with that? Who was helpful for you? If you find yourself still in that circumstance that you're living on the street in an encampment, living in your car as a result of domestic abuse, I'd like to hear about your circumstance if you're comfortable sharing it. We're at 866-893-KPECC, 866-893-5722, or the AirTalk page, kpecc.org. Julia, one of the things that we hear about are that there are safe houses that different charitable groups create where women who've had to flee domestic violence are able to go. Often they have to take their children with them, so that has to be taken into account. Are there not enough beds at those safe houses to handle the number of women in distress?
That's particularly true in LA County. I've been told that there's about 1,000 shelter beds available for survivors of domestic or intimate partner violence in LA County alone. And the problem is that we just have so many more people in need. And that number, that 1,000 number, is emergency shelters, so that's where you go for only 30 days in a very urgent situation, and transitional shelters where you can stay for a little bit longer and really try to recover. So, when you call 211 or whatever the emergency lines are, there's a chance that there may not be a bed available for you.
All right, we're talking with KPCC producer and reporter Julia Paskin. She created the Pushed Out series, and I urge you to visit LAist.com to see all the work that she's done in not just quantifying the problem, but also in the personal stories of women who found themselves in these circumstances, which adds beyond the crisis of not having a place to live, the emotional trauma of the experience of being abused, and then taking that very difficult step of leaving to avoid the ongoing abuse. Again, if you've ever found yourself in this circumstance, I'd like to hear how you navigated it. If you're there right now and you're comfortable talking about it, please join us at 866-893-KPCC. Also joining us is Amy Turk, the CEO of the Downtown Women's Center. Thank you very much, Ms. Turk, for being with us. I've had the chance to visit your shelter and to see the wonderful work that you do with women there. What percentage would you say of the residents of your facility have endured this?
Thank you, Larry. At Downtown Women's Center, we address women's homelessness through housing and healthcare and finding people in employment. And we also do our own community-based research to learn more about the experience of homelessness among people who identify as female and women. And in our most recent Los Angeles City Women's Needs Assessment, 53% of the women that we surveyed had experienced domestic violence or interpersonal partner violence in their lifetime. 36% had experienced that over the course of the last year.
So the ones that had experienced it most recently, is that broken out between those who experienced that violence on the street, so to speak, versus those who that violence caused them to leave within recent months?
Yeah, it's a little hard to parse out. In the most recent LA Homeless Services Authority homeless count, they identified that of women, 19% were experiencing homelessness as a direct result of domestic violence, like fleeing domestic violence, though we know the experience of domestic violence at any point in someone's lifetime can lead to subsequent events that ultimately lead into homelessness. We're not too surprised that a majority of who we serve have experienced some type of gender-based violence, and that the result becomes, unable to pay for housing.
We're talking with Amy Turk, CEO of the Downtown Women's Center, from where we actually did a broadcast of Air Talk several years ago. Again, I'd like to hear from listeners who found themselves homeless as a result of domestic violence that they could not endure, were not willing to endure. Their life was at risk if they stayed, who left and found themselves with no resources to be able to provide housing, and as a result went without a safe place to live. Byron in Glendora, thank you for joining us. This is something you experienced?
Yes, I definitely did. I'm actually gay, and I, in my past relationship, the two of us, being two guys, we would get into pretty heated arguments, and he always initiated the fight, like the physical abuse, and with me being stronger than he was, I was always the one who seemed, to be from the outside to look like I was at fault, and so. I didn't want to end up in jail or anything worse, because of that. So I had to leave and be homeless, just to get out of that situation.
How long were you without a place to live, Byron?
I would say about 6 months. Then I just moved back to my family's place.
All right, Byron. What was helpful for you, if anything, during that 6-month period to get you back to a place to live? Were there anybody who reached out to you and any services provided?
No services were provided. I really avoided the police because I was, in a different mind state where he was an illegal alien from Ireland, and so I didn't want him to get deported or anything, and so I just kind of kept it to myself. I talked to friends, but nothing. I didn't really get any support.
Byron, we're glad that you were able to find a place to live, and you're back now living in Southern California?
Yes.
All right. Byron, thank you for sharing your experience. Also joining us on Air Talk is Nikki Brown, staff attorney at Community Legal Aid of Southern California. Her clients include survivors of domestic violence. Thank you so much, Ms. Brown, for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Larry. It's great to be here.
So speak to some of the ways, if you will, that you work with clients who particularly find themselves without a place to live because they've had to flee violence.
It's especially interesting because we provide legal services to people, my particular clients that are all experiencing domestic violence, and they're in a position to have had to flee their home, maybe in shelter, maybe aren't in shelter, and have to balance the difficulties of finding a way to survive moment to moment, even after fleeing, and also access legal services, and also face the idea of appearing in court in front of their abusers, and also have to face the possibility of dealing with law enforcement, even though some of them might be like our last caller in a position where they don't want to harm their partner. That partner is undocumented, or there's some other risk to experiencing law enforcement.
And what do you say to a client who's concerned about the partner or former partner being arrested, either because they're fearful of retaliation or because they're still feeling enough there, even though they're dealing with victimization, that they don't want their former partner to end up in jail? How do you talk with them through that?
It is a really difficult thing to talk folks through. There's different reasons why they wouldn't want their partner in jail. They may still have feelings of love for that partner. They may be financially dependent on that partner.
Sharing kids.
Be dependent on that partner to help with child care. Ultimately, what I have to let clients know is, first, it's the client's choice. I don't judge. I decided not to get a restraining order for my own safety. However, if that partner ends up in jail, it's not your fault. You didn't put them there. They put themselves there. So most important is to protect yourself. And unfortunately, if harm or difficulty comes to your partner, that's on them.
We're talking with attorney Nikki Brown with Community Legal Aid of Southern California. Again, I'm asking you if you have been dealing with domestic violence either in your past or currently, and that led you to homelessness. I'd like to hear what the upshot of that was, how you coped with it, whether anyone reached out to you, what was helpful for you, or if you're in a circumstance now where you're experiencing homelessness, perhaps we can help you with some of the services available. 866-893-KPECC or the AirTalk page, kpecc.org. Laura in Venice says, I was forced out of my home due to long-term domestic violence. I delayed leaving because I didn't want to leave my dog behind. I finally was able to take my dog and leave. I found someone who let me sleep in a really dirty garage. I stayed there, tried finding work, had to drink and shower using a garden hose. I got parasites while I was there. I had 4 walls around me, but the conditions were horrible. Thankfully, a friend was able to give me a hand up and a better place to live. That's Laura in Venice. Laura, thank you very much for sharing your experience. Anna joining us in downtown Los Angeles. You're on Air Talk.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
So I work as a case manager, and I often have women working to our organization. Unfortunately, housing is not a service that we offer. We offer mental health and pantry services. So, but they're often, like 2 days ago, I had a girl coming out from the hospital. She was still wearing the hospital clothes, and she was a victim of domestic violence. And she was like, I have nowhere to go. And it was heartbreaking because I called so many shelters, women's shelters, and it was just hard. And I was thinking like, oh my God, this is really hard to just find a place. And even after you find a place, who's going to offer transportation? And they never offer a place for her. They were like, well, she needs to call herself. And I'm like, well, she needs to call herself, but she doesn't want to talk to anyone at this moment. You know, she was very scared. She was like, I just need to get to a safe place. And I'm also in recovery, so I need a good place where I can continue with my recovery.
Anna, what you're describing a highly traumatic experience. I'm sorry, you were going to add to that. Go right ahead.
No, it's fine. Last week I also had a guy. And he was like, "Can we just make sure that it's not a regular shelter because I've been raped twice?"
Hmm.
And I was like, "Oh my God!" I'm new. I just recently graduated, so I'm not familiar with many resources, and I'm all just passionate trying to find the places and the right resources.
Yeah.
Every time I called, I know there's a lot of bureaucracy and things that go in the middle that it's not as easy as we think. We have
Anna,
this idea.
Anna, can I also ask, because you said you provide mental health resources, are there sufficient resources out there to meet the needs of the clients with whom you're speaking?
I don't think so. I don't think there are enough resources. And I think we have this perception that people are on the street because that's their choice. And it's not always their choice. And it's hard. They need good communication skills to go and ask for help. Some of our patients can't even write. They can't fill out the applications. They don't know how to read or write. There's so many little things that can deprive a person from moving on and looking for help.
Anna, thank you very much. What is the name of your organization, by the way?
It's called Weber Community Center.
All right. Thank you for being with us. We'll continue a conversation with KPCC reporter and producer Julia Paskin. She created the Pushed Out series, which details the very high percentage of unhoused Angelino women who have been victims of domestic violence and how that violence often continues even as they're living in encampments on the street or in their vehicles. Also joining us from the Downtown Women's Center, CEO Amy Turk, and staff attorney at the Community Legal Aid of Southern California, Nikki Brown. We'll take more calls. Sophie in East Hollywood, Chuck in Long Beach. We're at 866-893-KPCC. Back in just 1 minute. It's Air Talk on KPCC. I'm Larry Mantle. Good to have you with us. We're talking about the series Pushed Out, which you can read in its entirety at LAist.com, produced and reported by our Julia Paskin. Amy Turk is CEO of the Downtown Women's Center, joining us as well, and attorney Nikki Brown, Community Legal Aid of SoCal. I'm just curious, Amy, of the Downtown Women's Center, about the mental health services. How big is the need there for women who have no place to go?
The mental health need is needed, of course, in homeless services. We have a women's health clinic where we provide counseling and psychiatry and access to primary health care. And the experience of homelessness in and of itself, of course, is traumatic. So we employ a practice called trauma-informed care, which means that we come from a perspective of not thinking, what's wrong with you, but thinking about what happened to you. And certainly understanding the experience of gender-based violence, domestic violence in particular, creates the need for a supportive environment. It's not that it necessarily creates mental illness per se, but that trauma, people need time to heal from that trauma.
Yeah, what Anna was describing is tremendous trauma for the woman just out of the hospital and going through her efforts to get off of drugs and everything else that she was dealing with simultaneously. Nikki Brown, I know you're not only an attorney working with clients who are going through this, but you yourself found yourself in this position. Can you speak to that challenge of all these needs existing at the same time?
Yeah, it is an extreme challenge. The first bit of it is you have to decide to leave. You have to decide it's more dangerous to stay at home than it is to be outside, potentially. And there's not a lot of resources. We've heard that there just aren't enough beds. It's hard to get in touch with them. They have to prioritize the most vulnerable people and still can't make it work with all of them. I had a little dog, like one of the people who we heard from today, and didn't want any harm to come to her. Thankfully, I didn't have children with my abuser. Many people have to deal with, what am I going to do with my children? Can I flee into homelessness? Will I find shelter? Will somebody take care of all of us? And then you have to deal with your day-to-day, like staying clean and fed and being safe. It's a lot when you're under that kind of stress.
I'm going to ask you a personal question. Please feel free not to answer if you feel it's inappropriate, you don't want to respond. But I'm just curious, given what you went through and working with clients, being so active in this and right now, is that at all a part of your ongoing healing from what you went through?
Absolutely, 100%. I think that this is the work for me, in part because as I get to help heal my community, I'm healing myself. Every day I stand up for my clients in ways that I wish I had stood up for myself, and I'm getting better every day.
That's wonderful. Nikki Brown, Staff Attorney, Community Legal Aid of Southern California. Sophie in East Hollywood, thank you for joining us. Please share your experience.
I grew up in a really abusive home, and after a particular violent episode, right after I turned 18, I was still in high school, it was March, I ran away, and I lived in a very rural community, so I didn't have options. There was no internet or access to information about women's shelter, and I had tried to call CPS multiple times growing up, but it wasn't effective. And so I went to the only place I thought that I could get a job, and I went to an exotic dance club for women. One of the women took me in, and I got a job there and saved up enough money to buy a car, and I worked with my principal at my high school at the time to commute, and I was able to graduate high school. It was a hard life.
Yeah, and where do you see yourself today? Coming out of that abuse in your home, and your obviously resilience in getting the help of the woman, your coworker, in all of this. Where's your life at today?
I've been really blessed that I was able to move to a city where I had more access to resources. I put myself through college. I got a great job. I got access to years and years and years of therapy. And that really helped me come to terms with it. Some things you just don't even understand are wrong. You think are normal growing up. You don't even realize that that's a bad behavior. So a lot of reprogramming happening at this point. But I think that I'm doing pretty well. But it's been 20 years. It's been a very long healing process.
Sophie, thank you very much for sharing your experience. Sophie in East Hollywood with us on Air Talk. Julia Paskin, KPCC producer and reporter. Her series is Pushed Out. You can read it at LAist.com. Julia, we're getting so many terrific and very poignant calls from our listeners, and I can only imagine in doing all the reporting and research you did, you've had similar conversations.
Yeah, and I'd like to invite anybody who's not able to share their comments to go to LAist.com/pushedout, and in any of the articles you can find all the way at the bottom, there's an opportunity to share more of your experience with us, and we can help that use that information that you share to inform our reporting. So we'd very much like to continue. But I mean, I just want to echo the resilience and the strength that I've encountered from women like Nikki, from Sophie, who just called in. It's common to underestimate survivors, and if they're just provided with the right assistance at the right time, so much suffering and so much further trauma can be avoided. And I think that just, we should give space and credence to what they've already survived and what they're capable of accomplishing.
It's quite impressive. 866-893-KPCC. Liana writes on the page, I couldn't leave because I had no family anywhere and I was isolated, so no friends. I didn't want put my child into homelessness either. Even though I had no problem at all with my husband going to jail, I couldn't call the police because I was an undocumented immigrant, and he used to threaten to have me deported if I called the police. That's Liana. Liana, thank you so much. I hope your circumstances is far better today. Maura writes on the page, something caller said reminded me of another issue. Congregate shelters are not acceptable for anyone, but perhaps especially for survivors and people experiencing PTSD. Some shelters are trying to provide safe spaces for female survivors, completely separate sleeping areas, bathrooms, but not for male survivors who have been victims of men. That's Maura writing on the Air Talk page at kpecc.org. Let's talk with Chuck in Long Beach. You're on Air Talk.
Hi, Larry. I was a victim of domestic violence from my wife, and we had 3 small children. And I found that there was a lot of great immediate help and response, but being a male victim from a female, it took a long time. There was 4 times the police had come to my house before they actually made an arrest. I understand it's probably fairly rare, but I think one of the important things is the mental abuse that goes on in addition to the physical abuse that can be worse and much more long-term in its effects. And also, when children are involved, your life is complicated. There was a lot of help, but some of the help had to come from, with strings attached. Essentially, through some extenuating circumstances, I was being evicted at the same time, and I had no idea how quickly that could happen. In particularly in Long Beach at that time, I think there was loopholes that I didn't know about, and they exercised those loopholes and got me shortly after my wife was arrested. The sheriffs were at my door, and I, had it not been for friends, I can't imagine how our life would have been affected.
So is that who you stayed with? Were friends, or did you end up in a shelter? Or?
I had friends that took me in, and I was able to save our stuff, my kids' things and my things, and I had to solely, resort or rely on social services and what might have been available to me. I doubt that would have been the case. That it really, things moved, very slowly.
Chuck, I so appreciate your call. I'm sorry we're getting tight on time. You said this is probably very rare where your wife ended up going to jail because of violence toward you. But I have to say, every time we talk about the subject of domestic violence, we have men who call in or post on the page who describe circumstances similar to the ones that you just described. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate it very much. Julia Paskin, back to you for a final word on this. What ongoing reporting are you planning for this project?
Well, we're hoping to incorporate the feedback that we receive from our readers and our listeners. We've provided some resource information, but we're also hoping for providers that we did not get in contact with to help us grow this database that we have on the Pushed Out landing page, because as so many survivors expressed to us that it's just so hard to find the right help, and that there's so many boxes you need to check and so much you need to meet for requirements in order to just get a little bit of help. So if we can help build a better resource list and get people that information, we'd very much like to do that.
All right. Liz tweeted at Air Talk, the shelters usually won't let you keep your job if your abuser knows where it is for obvious reasons, because they could follow you back to the shelter. Also, most of them won't allow you to bring pets, which you don't want to leave behind with the abuser. Liz says, luckily, I'm a professional. I'm a veterinarian, so I was able to procure housing. Liz, thank you for sharing your experiences. Julia Paskin's work can be read at laist.com. Pushed Out is the title of the series. That's laist.com/pushed out to read her continuing reporting on women who are in homelessness directly related to the domestic violence that they have gone through. Amy Turk is the CEO of the Downtown Women's Center. Thank you so much, Amy. And Nikki Brown, Community Legal Aid SoCal staff attorney for the organization. She advocates for clients who are domestic violence survivors. It's Air Talk on 89.3 KPCC.